Served as the United States ambassador to China for 2 years during President Barack Obama's first term. He's currently the chairman of the board at the Atlantic Council, an international think tank, and he joins us right here in the studio. Ambassador, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks, Anand. Pleasure to be with you.
That big number that came out of Beijing, as we heard from our reporter, 7%. That's a lowering of the growth rate for China. Did that surprise you?
It doesn't surprise me. Just being involved in the corporate world, we very much feel that the economy has slowed in China. In fact, I'm not sure slowed is even an accurate description. I think it's stopped. And the question really will be, is it 7% or is it more like 5%? And I think we'll probably get more and more news coming out of China in the months or the quarters ahead in terms of what the real economy is producing. So this is going to have implications in terms of economic policy making. Does China look inward as they begin to feel that the economy is not producing what they had expected? Or does it cause them to quicken the pace of their reforms, which are critically important to the opening to the rest of the world and to future economic success?
Right, and China being a big player in the world's economy, what kind of impact is this going to have on the world economy?
Huge
I mean,
impact.
China now talks about the new normal. This is the new normal.
That's right.
Says, yeah.
We have to remember too that it's going to be a smaller top line growth, but a larger base, presumably. So China's going through an historic and an unprecedented transition from an investment-led consumption or export model to more of a consumption model. And that means you've got to expand domestic enterprise, you've got to move more toward commitment to rule of law, business adjudication, intellectual property rights, and all of that. Very difficult, and it's going to take some time to get through those issues. But it's going to result in a stronger, more robust economy domestically for China, and therefore, the continuation of a major engine of growth for the world.
Looking at foreign investment, the Premier in his speech gave the assurance that restrictions on foreign investment, especially bureaucratic problems, are going to be eased. Are you confident that's going to happen?
We'll see. We've heard the talk in recent months and years, and we haven't seen an actual implementation on that commitment. It's important that Premier Li Keqiang at the Lianghui, at the NPC, make that statement, but it's going to be even more important that there be implementation on that. Because what you don't want to have happen is the major investors and traders and manufacturers in China, who are servicing what is one of the truly great economies anywhere in the world today, to begin to lose confidence in the future of reform. China's at a critical point right now in terms of the leadership transition. There's a new team, they're in place, they're strong. And what will be the policies then that will guide this leadership team over the next almost 10 years? So as they begin to talk about those, and as the rest of the world begins to interpret them and then see them in practice, what will they actually mean? Will they go fast or will they go slow? Will the words that are being spoken by Premier Li actually result in real implementation? That will be key, and the world will be waiting.
The conferences are taking place right now, the two big conferences. Is there something that you're waiting to hear that you haven't heard in these conferences yet?
I'd love to hear a little bit more about the broader economic reform package. What does the commitment, for example, to rule of law mean? So we heard a little bit about rule of law in the fourth plenum last year. What does that mean? What are the implications then in terms of the overall economic policy priorities? It would be good to hear something about air quality, which is a big issue in particularly the northern cities, where you have a reduced life expectancy as compared to the south because of the air quality problems. Premier Li Keqiang talked about it 2 years ago at the Lianghui. There hasn't been much done in terms of follow-up. He spoke about it again in his opening statement, but the specifics still have not been fully defined or articulated. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about what they intend to do around this critically important issue, because it not only has to do with health, it has to do with economic vitality longer term, because people are not going to want to live in or move into cities where the air quality is poor, and that's going to drive talent and brain power to some other marketplace. So China's got to be really concerned about how they deal with this issue, and it's going to take some time, but they have to begin implementing some practices and policies that actually get them to the finish line.
Right. The other big reform that China is talking about, and it wants to implement policies that will ease that, and that is the burgeoning campaign against corruption, the anti-corruption drive in China. Have you heard anything at this conference before that's going to give you confidence that that's going to go a few steps ahead?
Well, I think the anti-corruption campaign will continue. It's been far more aggressive and ambitious than I think anybody would have thought just a short year or two ago. I think it continues. I think it deepens. I think it probably moves into elements of the state-owned enterprises. And we'll see how far it goes, but Xi Jinping clearly is working to consolidate his power base. He's willing to build greater trust in the party, and he knows in order to get there, to gain the trust and regain the trust of the people of China, he's got to clear out a lot of the bad behavior and the bad actors who have been associated with corruption in the past. That's not an easy thing to do. It's step by step, but I don't think you end that campaign anytime soon.
Let's talk about the relationship with the United States. At the moment, the U.S. is negotiating with its partners in that region, the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. How is that agreement being viewed by China?
Well, I think they're intent on doing their own version of a TPP, which indeed they have put together with some of their free trade partners in the region. It's kind of the counterbalance to America's involvement with TPP. I think it's dangerous to see two very distinctly different trade agreements take shape in the Asia-Pacific region. Perhaps it was inevitable, but over time, they're going to have to be integrated. They're going to have to be integrated around standards that speak to trade facilitation, lowering the burden, whether they're tariff or non-tariff barriers. And that means at some point, the United States and China are going to have to sit down and have a conversation about our vision of TPP, if in fact we get to the finish line. And that, in large part, will have much to do with our own internal politics here in the United States, Trade Promotion Authority. And I think the best way to do that would be for both countries to focus on a bilateral investment treaty. This is probably the most important economic step we could be taking right now, and we do need to take an economic step just to keep us focused on the more important futuristic issues, and there's nothing more important than our economic relationship. But that, over time, would allow us to then integrate our thinking a little bit more around TPP and the vision that China has for the region.
Another term we've been hearing coming out of China, economic diplomacy. We've heard President Xi Jinping talk about that as well. We know that China is now getting more and more involved, for instance, in Latin America. Its investments are growing in Latin America. What do you make of that, economic diplomacy, getting the economic relationship to drive its overall diplomacy?
Well, we're hearing about the Silk Road. We're hearing about the engagement with sub-Saharan Africa, with Latin America. In fact, some of these relationships have gone on for some time. They're being formalized now, particularly the Silk Road initiative. It's Xi Jinping's initiative. He's built a leading group around it, so it's to be taken very seriously. And in fact, I think many in the region, particularly Central Asia, are quite excited about what this might mean in terms of lifting their overall prospects for infrastructure, for example. But I think this is an example of China wanting to ensure that it secures raw materials, the critical raw materials it needs for growth. They're not all going to come from the region, and as China grows a larger economy, their demands, of course, are going to be that much greater, and you're going to have to seek out new markets in order to get those raw materials. Therein will lie one of their challenges as they begin to look at the next phase of the Silk Road or their engagement with Africa. Is it only transactional, or is there something that the local parties benefit from? And if it's seen as just a transactional relationship where China takes something out and doesn't leave anything behind in terms of better lives, stronger infrastructure, a commitment to good, clean government, transparency, then I think it will likely backfire over time. So again, China, with respect to its economic diplomacy, is at a critical point. Many people are watching. They're anticipating that there will be some next steps here. It's being taken seriously by Xi Jinping, clearly at the highest levels. So as it plays out, we'll see what happens.
Something else that's come out of the meetings, and this is an important number as well, 10%. That's the increase in the Chinese military budget. It's the lowest increase in the last dozen or so years. Is that a reflection of the fact that the overall growth rate is going to be lower than expected?
Well, I think it's an example of where China wants to go in terms of their spending priorities. we spend a lot in the United States, China spends a lot. My biggest complaint is that there isn't a lot of transparency around China's spending. In other words, what are their priorities? What are they putting money behind? What does it mean in terms of the whole regional security balance? This is not well understood, and it would, I think, be a confidence-building step if China were to infuse a little more transparency around its defense spending. But it doesn't surprise me that it's going up. I suspect that a lot of that spending will be in terms of their maritime capabilities, their ability to project beyond, let's say, the first island chain. It seems to me that that's where at least some of their early thinking is going. That also means that it's going to create a response in the region. Southeast Asia, the Indian Ocean, wherever they might happen to venture. And it means a commitment to security by both the United States, our friends and allies, and how China chooses to make its new moves will be very, very important.
The Chinese President Xi Jinping will be visiting Washington later this year. What do you believe should be on the agenda?
Well, I think the two most important things that both the United States and China should look at doing, one is economic, and that is a bilateral investment treaty. I think there's a lot of work that needs to go into such an agreement, and it would take us in very positive directions, which we do need to go toward. I think the second would be how to up our global collaboration specific to the Middle East. We have a huge problem in the Middle East right now. We have nation states deteriorating. We've got large regions that are ungoverned, and it's giving rise to brutal and terrorist behavior. And I think China has a very important role to play there, along with the United States and other regional leaders. I'd love to see them step up their game a little bit in terms of problem solving around what we find in the Middle East. So the bilateral investment treaty, regional cooperation in the Middle East, and then cybersecurity, I think, is clearly an issue of the future and one that is on a lot of minds and still left relatively ill-defined in terms of how both countries approach it.
Ambassador John Huntsman, thanks for joining us.
Great to be with you.
We need